The San Juan River rolled black under the moon, swollen with late spring melt. The current dragged driftwood and drowned branches past the cottonwoods, carrying the smell of wet earth and something older, metallic, like the taste of blood. A thin mist lay across the banks, softening the rocks, hiding the footprints of men who had gathered there only hours before. They had bound her at the edge of the water. Lena Blackbird, daughter of a medicine woman, once promised bride of her own people's chief, stood with wrists tied raw by rope, hair heavy with mud, dress torn by the thornbrush they had dragged her through. The knot at her chest tightened each time she breathed. They said she had betrayed them. They said the white soldiers had found their winter camp because of her words. A scapegoat was easier than grief. They had painted shame across her skin, 3 black stripes of ash, from cheek to collarbone, a mark that meant liar in their tongue. By dawn, she would be cast into the river. If she sank, her guilt was sealed. If she floated, they would burn her body where it washed up. The crowd had already thinned. Warriors returned to their tents. Women gathered children away from the sight. Only the old stood near, silent, as if unwilling to watch but too bound to turn their backs. A boy, no more than 6, had lingered until his grandmother yanked him away. "Don't look," she hissed. But he had looked. His eyes had caught Lena's, wide with something between fear and pity. That was the last human kindness she'd been offered. The rope cut deeper. She tasted iron in her mouth from biting her own lip. She prayed, not for rescue, but for one more hour of strength to keep her head high. The shame painted on her face burned worse than the rope. From the cottonwoods above the bank, another pair of eyes had been watching. Elias Crow was not a hero by nature. He was a man who had fought too many fights and buried too many comrades to believe in heroics. Once, he'd worn a cavalry coat. Once, he'd ridden with Sherman's men through Georgia, torching fields that had belonged to boys not much younger than himself. When the war ended, he had carried nothing home but scars and silence. He had wandered west with a horse, a broken rifle, and no destination. Folks called him a drifter. Truth was, he was just trying to stay ahead of his ghosts. Tonight, the ghosts had led him here. He had seen the gathering from a distance, torches bobbing near the river, voices carrying through the cottonwoods. He'd tethered his mule, crept closer, and watched enough to know what was coming. He should have walked away. This was not his fight. White man meddling in tribal justice ended with arrows in the gut or worse. He had no stake in the girl. He didn't even know her name. But when he saw the way she stood, back straight, chin lifted, refusing to bow under the weight of the rope or the stairs, it pulled at something deep inside him. It reminded him of a widow in Tennessee who had spit at the soldiers come to take her last mule. Reminded him of his own sister who had died with her baby in her arms while the townsfolk called it God's punishment. It reminded him that silence was the easiest kind of cowardice. So he stayed in the shadows, waiting. When the last of the torches faded and only the river's murmur filled the night, he stepped down the slope. His boots sank in the mud. The smell of the water rose around him, cold, algae-slick, and endless. Lena's eyes followed him with the stillness of a deer cornered between rifles. He raised a hand, slow, not to startle her. His voice was gravel from disuse. "Don't scream," he muttered. "Ain't here to hurt you." She said nothing. The rope gleamed wet in the moonlight where it cut her wrists. Her silence was not trust. It was the silence of someone who had been accused so many times that words no longer mattered. Elias crouched, pulled a knife from his boot. The steel flashed once before sinking into the knot. It took longer than he liked. The hemp was soaked and swollen. His breath quickened. At last, the rope gave with a dry snap. Her hands fell free, mottled with bruises. She did not flinch, did not thank him. Only rubbed her wrists as if to feel the pain was to prove she still lived. "You can walk?" he asked. She looked past him, toward the dark sweep of cottonwoods, toward her people's camp, then back at the river. Nowhere was safe. "Yes," she said. Her voice was hoarse, cracked like old wood, but steady. He nodded once. "Then we best be ghosts before dawn." Above them, a crow called from the branches, sharp as a warning. By the time dawn broke over the mesa, the camp stirred with suspicion. A dog's bark first, then the shouts of a young hunter who had gone to the riverbank and found nothing but frayed rope drifting in the reeds. The old women wailed it as a curse. The men gathered, fists white on their spears. One word passed from mouth to mouth, hot as coal, stolen. The San Juan people did not lose what they meant to keep. If Lena Blackbird had slipped the river's judgment, it could only be by an outsider's hand. And that made it worse than betrayal. It made it war. Elias and Lena had already put miles between themselves and the river, but miles meant little in that country. The land was open, rolling with sagebrush and red earth, each canyon carrying sound farther than a man wanted. His mule plodded under the weight of the bedrolls. She walked beside it, silent, every step barefoot through grit and stone. Her feet bled. She made no complaint. At the crest of a ridge, Elias stopped. From there, the view opened wide, down the valley, back toward the smoke of the campfires curling against the pale sky. He watched shadows move like ants. Scouts already spreading. They would pick up his tracks soon enough. He spat into the dust. "They'll come for you." "For me," she corrected, voice sharp. "Not you." He glanced at her wrists, still raw from rope burn. "Don't matter. They'll think you had help. And help needs Hagen." For the first time, a flicker of something broke through her stillness. Not gratitude, anger. "Then why?" she asked. "Why cut the rope? Why not let me drown and be done?" Elias rubbed the stubble on his jaw. He had no good answer. "Maybe I'm tired of watching folk die for nothing." Her eyes narrowed, dark and burning. For them, it was not nothing. He let the words hang between them. She was right, of course. To her people, she was more than a girl. She was a symbol, guilt, betrayal, Dishonor. To save her was to spit in their wound. Below the ridge, a hawk wheeled, circling tight. Elias shifted his rifle strap higher on his shoulder. "We keep moving." They trudged on, hours swallowed by heat and silence. The desert played tricks, distant mesas shimmered like blue water, rocks glowed as if alive. Elias's throat grew raw. He passed the canteen. She refused at first, then took a sip, lips trembling but eyes unbroken. When night fell again, they made camp in a shallow arroyo. The fire was small, more ember than flame. Elias dozed sitting up, hat over his eyes. Lena sat across from him, staring into the coals as if waiting for them to spell her fate. In the glow, the blackish stripes still mark her face, smeared now, half-washed by sweat. Shame lingering even after the rope was gone. She lifted a coal with a stick, held it close. Elias stirred, half asleep, and muttered, "Careful, you'll burn." "That is the point," she whispered. Before he could rise, she pressed the glowing coal against her own forearm. The hiss filled the silence. Her teeth clenched, but she did not cry out. The smell of scorched flesh curled into the air. When she pulled the coal away, a raw red brand smoldered on her skin. Elias swore low. "God Almighty." She looked at him then, not pleading, not broken. Defiant. Better my scar than their paint. It was her way of reclaiming what they'd forced on her. No longer marked by their hands. Marked by her own choice. The first crack of defiance. Elias felt something shift in his chest. He had seen men in battle carve their names into their rifles, carve tally marks for each kill. But this was different. This was survival, made flesh. From somewhere in the distance came the faint drum of hooves. The tribe had found the trail. The night was never fully dark in that country. Even the stars cast a pale wash across the desert, silvering the sage and cutting faint shadows into the arroyos. Elias woke to the sound of hooves, faint but sure, carrying across the stone like drums in a canyon. He pressed a hand to Lena's shoulder. "They're close." She stirred without fear, as if she had expected this moment all along. Her new scar was raw, red against her brown skin, but she did not hide it. She rose, brushing dust from her torn dress. "They will not stop," she said. He nodded. "I reckon." The mule brayed soft, restless. Elias packed the coals of their fire under sand, slung his rifle, and guided her up the ridge before the riders crested it. They moved fast, shadows against the horizon, 6 maybe 7 mounted figures, feathers, and rifles glinting under the moon. Scouts. The two of them slipped down the far side of the ridge, shale rattling beneath their boots. Elias cursed under his breath. Sound carried too easy here. They found a washout, narrow and deep, carved by spring floods. Elias pressed her against the wall, crouching low, rifle across his knees. His breath slowed. His heart hammered. The riders came above them, horses snorting, hooves cracking rock. Elias could see their legs silhouetted, the sway of rifles strapped to their backs. One paused, dismounted, crouched low to the ground. Fingers touched the dust. Elias saw him raise his head, nod. They had the trail. The scout whistled. The riders turned. The whole band wheeled their horses, moving down the slope. Toward them. Elias hissed through his teeth. They'll box us in. Lena spoke, calm and low. Give me to them. He shot her a look, sharp. Hell I will. You do not know the cost, she whispered. For me, they demand blood. For you, they will demand a price you cannot pay. Elias tightened his jaw. He had seen hangings, seen firing squads. He knew what men demanded when pride was bruised. Ain't their price to set? Her eyes flared. It is their land. He had no answer, only the bitter truth that sat between them. The first rider's silhouette appeared at the mouth of the wash. Elias steadied his rifle. His finger tightened, then froze. Because from the rider came not a shout, not a curse, but a cry high and small. It was a child's voice. He squinted through the moonlight. A boy sat astride the horse, no more than 8, clutching the manet, face painted with ash. Behind him, a warrior rode, hands steady on the reins, letting the boy lead. It was a lesson. A teaching. The boy's eyes swept the wash, and landed on Lena. Recognition sparked there. Elias knew it. The same boy who had looked at her by the river. The boy froze, mouth open, chest heaving. Then, in a voice too clear for the desert silence, he called, "She is alive." The words cracked the night open. The riders surged forward, hooves pounding, rifles raised. Elias grabbed Lena's wrist. They ran, shale sliding beneath them, dust choking the air. Bullets sparked off stone. A horse screamed. They burst into the open, lungs burning, the mule braying in panic behind. Elias swung the rifle back, fired once. A rider fell. The others pulled short, not for fear of him, but because the boy's cry had changed everything. Now the whole tribe would know she lived. They would not kill her quick. They would demand a price. And already Elias felt it in the pit of his stomach. The price was not just hers. It would be his. By the third day, Elias knew they could not outrun them. The mule staggered on swollen knees. Lena's feet bled through cloth wrappings, and his rifle had but a handful of cartridges left. The desert itself had turned traitor, stone rising into cliffs that funneled them into a box canyon. They stopped where the rock walls rose sheer, no way out but back the way they had come. Elias stood tall, jaw set, as Lena sank to her knees, palms pressed to the dust. She wasn't praying. She was bracing. The riders came at dusk. First their shadows stretched long across the canyon floor. Then the horses themselves appeared, painted hides glinting copper in the dying sun. Spears upright, rifles slung, feathers whipping in the wind. At their center rode an old man, shoulders draped in a wolf pelt, eyes like burning coals in a riverbed. The tribe's chief. Lena's would-be father-in-law. They reined in before the fugitives, silence falling heavy as dust. Elias lifted his rifle halfway, then let it drop. He wasn't fool enough to point steel at 30 armed men. He planted the butt in the ground, hand loose at his side. The chief dismounted slow, each motion heavy with weight. His voice was iron when it came. You took what we cast to the river. Elias said nothing. The wind tugged at his hat brim. Lena kept her gaze fixed on the ground, shame and defiance tangled in her stillness. You broke the rope, the chief said. Now the rope must bind another. Elias narrowed his eyes. Meanin. The chief looked at him, long, then spoke words like carved stone. She lives only if you stay. The canyon seemed to breathe around them, hot and close. Elias blinked. You want me. You stole our judgment, the chief said. Then you will carry it. One life for one life. Your blood for her shame. The riders stirred, restless, the horses pawing at the dirt. Elias felt the weight of their eyes. It wasn't justice they wanted. It was balance, an offering to stitch the wound his rescue had torn open. He spat dust from his mouth. And if I refuse? The chief's jaw tightened. Then both of you burn, and the boy who called out her name will strike the first spark. Elias's stomach twisted. He looked at Lena. She lifted her face at last, eyes meeting his. Dark, fierce, filled with something heavier than fear. She shook her head once, sharp. "No," she whispered. "Do not give them your blood." He studied her raw scar, the coalburn still angry on her arm, the way she held herself even now with spine straight. He felt an ache he hadn't known in years, something close to tenderness, something near rage. "You ask a man to stay in hell," Elias said to the chief. The old man's voice did not waver. "We ask you to pay the river's toll." The boy who had spoken at the wash rode forward then, horse trembling under his thin frame. He looked from Lena to Elias, lips pressed tight. In his silence, Elias saw the small crack again, the possibility of something other than blood. But the canyon waited for his choice. Lena's whisper reached him like a prayer through dust. "They will take you, and I will still carry their mark." Elias's fingers brushed the rifle stock. He thought of war, of men hanged in towns for less. He thought of the coal hiss on her skin, her defiance etched forever. "Maybe," he muttered, voice low, "but I'd rather die standing than watch you drown twice." The words cut the silence. A murmur rippled through the riders. The boy's horse pawed the earth. The chief's eyes narrowed, unreadable. The price had been spoken, but the desert had not yet decided who would pay it. The canyon held its breath. The riders, the chief, Lena, Elias, all caught in a silence so taut it could break on a child's whisper. The wind dragged sand across stone, whispering like old bones. Elias stood square, rifle at his side, sweat cutting lines through the dust on his face. He had faced men before, blue coats, grey coats, drunk sheriffs, border rustlers, but never this, a whole people weighing him as if his life were a coin to be traded. The chief raised his hand. "Choose now. Kneel, and we take you in her place. Refuse, and you both feed the fire." Lena rose from the dust, slow, shoulders shaking not from fear but from fury. "No," she said, her voice cutting through the canyon like flint striking steel. "You call it justice, but it is hunger. You are not feeding balance. You are feeding shame." The warriors shifted in their saddles. Some looked away. Some spat into the dust. The boy who had cried her name clenched the reins tighter, his small fists white. The chief's eyes burned. "You dare speak." Lena's scar glowed red in the last light of dusk. She lifted her arm, the brand raw and blistered. "This mark is mine. Not yours. Not his. Mine. You cannot take it back. You cannot trade it. You cannot weigh it against another man's blood. I carry it." Her words cracked the silence open. For the first time, a murmur rose, not in agreement, not yet, but in uncertainty. The small human defiance that pierced the tribe's ritual certainty. The chief's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, another voice rose. Not loud. Not a warrior's roar. A tremor, but steady. "The boy. She walked with the rope," he said, voice breaking. "She did not cry. She did not fall. She stood. Maybe the river already judged her." It was small, but it was enough. Men shifted, murmurs growing. An elder woman dismounted, her hair long and grey, her face carved like weathered stone. She walked to Lena, touched the burn on her arm with fingers feather-light. Then she looked at the chief. "Her scar is proof enough," the old woman said. "Blood will not mend what is already carried." The canyon bent with the weight of her words. Elias's grip on his rifle loosened. The air itself seemed to ease, though the danger was not gone. He felt his knees weak with the relief he could not show. The chief's face was unreadable, torn between tradition and the shifting weight of his people's gaze. His eyes darted to Elias, then to Lena, then back to the boy and the elder woman. The crack of defiance had widened. Finally, the chief spoke, voice heavy as stone dragged across earth. "Then she lives." The relief was brief, fleeting, because he wasn't finished. "But you," the chief said, his gaze boring into Elias, "you walk from this canyon with her only if you leave something behind. A mark. A sign. Proof that our tribe was not mocked." Elias drew a slow breath, tasting dust, iron, and the bitter edge of inevitability. He knew what was coming. They would not kill him now, but they would carve their price onto his flesh. He spat into the sand. "Then do it." The riders stirred, a ripple of surprise at his calm. Lena's eyes widened, her lips parting, but no sound came. The chief nodded once. So it shall be. And the canyon night deepened, the firelight rising as the tribe prepared to take its due. They built the fire quick. Dry mesquite crackled, sparks swirling up into the dusk. Shadows danced on the canyon walls, long and warped, turning men into giants and horses into beasts from another world. The heat pressed close, sweat gathering on skin, smoke stinging eyes. Elias stood still as two warriors stepped forward. One carried a branding iron, nothing more than a length of iron hammered flat at the end, bent into a circle. A crude sun. The other held it in the coals, turning it until it glowed dull red. Lena's breath hitched, low and sharp. She stepped forward, but Elias gave her a look that froze her where she stood. Not harsh, not cold, just steady. "I've carried worse," he said, voice gravel. "This one I'll carry for you." The iron hissed as it left the fire. Smoke trailed. Elias stripped his shirt with one motion, baring his chest. His body was a map of scars already, bullet grooves, knife slices, puckered burns. The riders murmured. This man had bled enough to be more ghost than flesh. The warrior pressed the brand to his shoulder. The sound was sharp as a rattlesnake strike. Flesh hissed, white smoke curled upward, the smell thick, choking, burned hair, seared skin. Elias's jaw locked tight, teeth grinding, but he did not cry out. Not a word. Only his boots dug into the dust, body rigid against the fire's bite. When it was done, he sagged once, breath shuddering. The circle burned raw into his skin, red and blistered, stark against pale flesh. A mark not of shame, but of survival. The chief's voice carried. Now they will know. Our tribe was not mocked. The river's toll was paid. He gestured, and the warriors stepped back. The iron dropped into the dust, still glowing. Lena moved then, swift as the desert wind. She bent, seized the iron by the cool end, lifted it high. For a heartbeat, the tribe tensed, unsure. Then she turned, and without flinching, pressed the glowing metal against the ash stripes on her cheek. The hiss cut sharp. Her flesh seared. The black paint was replaced with raw scar. She dropped the iron, chest heaving, eyes burning. "This is mine," she said, voice ragged. "No man, no chief, no river can take it from me." Silence swept the canyon. Even the horses stilled. The boy's mouth hung open. The elder woman's eyes shone wet in the firelight. Elias looked at her through the haze of his own pain, chest tight, vision blurred. She was shaking, but she was standing. And that mattered more than anything. The chief's gaze lingered on her, unreadable. At last, he raised his hand. "Go. Both of you. The desert will finish what we began, if it chooses." No blessing. No forgiveness. Only release. Elias pulled his shirt back on, the fabric sticking to the burn. He steadied Lena as they moved past the circle of firelight. Each step away from the canyon felt heavy, final. The tribe did not follow. When they reached the ridge, Elias looked back once. The fire was a distant glow, voices fading into the night. Beside him, Lena pressed her fingers to her scarred cheek, then to his shoulder, where the circle burned. "We live," she whispered. "Not triumph. Not victory. Just fact." He nodded. "For now." The desert wind carried their silence. They walked until the stars blurred, until their legs shook under them. The mule stumbled but did not fall. Dawn came pale, the desert shifting from black to red, then to gold. In that light, their scars looked like new coins pressed into flesh, shining, angry, alive. At a dry wash, Elias dropped to sit, back against a boulder. His shirt clung wet with blood and sweat where the brand burned into him. He peeled it back, hissed through his teeth, but said nothing more. A man had to learn silence long before pain ever broke him. Lena crouched beside him, rinsing cloth in a trickle of water that seeped from a stone. She pressed it to his shoulder. The smell of seared skin rose again, sharp, bitter. He flinched once. She did not let go. "You should curse me," she said softly. He turned his head, slow. "For what?" "For making you carry my rope," she said. Her fingers trembled against his scar. "For the fire on your flesh. For their price." Elias's eyes narrowed. He spat dust, then muttered, "I carried worse for men who never even knew my name. Least this one was for something that still breathes." She looked at him then, not as a savior, not as a stranger, but as a man who had chosen to stay when he could have walked away. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she dug into the earth with her scarred hands, burying the iron circle she had carried from the canyon. She pressed it deep, covered it with stone. A grave for their shame. When she stood, she brushed her palms against her dress. Now it belongs to the desert. The sun climbed higher. Vultures wheeled in the distance, black wings tracing circles above the earth. Life went on, as it always did, cruel and steady. By noon they reached a patch of scrub where wild sage grew thick. Elias sank again, shoulders bowed. Lena plucked sprigs of the plant, crushed them between her fingers, and pressed the bitter-smelling pulp to his wound. He winced, then chuckled low, surprised at his own voice. "You patch me like a soldier's wife." She shook her head. "No. Like a woman who chooses what is hers." They did not speak after that. The wind carried only the rasp of insects, the hush of sand shifting. When night came, they built no fire. They lay on the earth, backs to stone, sky wide above them. Elias traced the scar on his shoulder with a finger, feeling its angry heat. Beside him, Lena touched her cheek, raw and new. 2 marks, different, but bound by the same fire. "In the dark," Elias said, almost to himself, "we'll live quiet. Maybe plant something. Beans. Corn. Something that grows." Lena turned her head. "Scars grow too." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh, might have been grief. The stars wheeled overhead. Coyotes yipped on the ridge. The desert folded them into its silence. And so the tale would be told, how a condemned bride was pulled from the river's hand, how her people demanded blood, how a stranger paid the fire's toll and walked scarred into the horizon beside her. No triumph. No glory. Just survival. And around the campfire, the question would linger, whispered from lip to lip, carried by the wind. What is the worth of a life, when shame and love burn the same into the skin?